Hi, I'm firearms attorney Gilbert Ambler, and today I want to talk about something interesting that's been going on for the past couple of weeks in south central Pennsylvania where I have an office. This interesting thing is that there was an escaped murderer on the loose. A convicted murderer escaped from prison. He was out for about roughly 2 weeks before he was recaptured. Lots of headlines about this. You probably saw it in the news, but the interesting thing that happened was my office started getting lots of calls. From people that all of a sudden had loved ones that weren't gun owners that wanted to know if they could borrow a firearm. And so we're going to talk today about the rules of loaning firearms, because when emergencies happen, you might want to get firearms into the hands of a loved one. And as a side note, I think it's hilarious and probably a good thing for the Second Amendment that people that didn't otherwise think about their personal safety when there's something going wrong all of a sudden want to reach out to a gun owner and get their hands on a gun. So kind of supports the thought process that many of us have about making sure that we have the ability to defend ourselves. And before we dive into this subject, if you have not yet hit that subscribe button, go ahead, hit subscribe, like, comment, share. That way you and your friends can keep getting this important Second Amendment related content. All right, we're going to start with the federal controls because each state is different. States might have their own restrictions on when you can transfer or loan or sell a firearm to another person. We're going to talk about the federal controls, and we're going to talk about the federal controls for non-licensees, meaning you don't have a federal firearms license. Generally speaking, it is illegal to transfer firearms across state lines to a resident of another state if you don't have a federal firearms license. There are a couple of exceptions. You cannot sell firearms across state lines. We're going to talk about when you can sell firearms and how that would work in just a couple of minutes. But just understand, cannot sell them without going through an FFL. If you're going to sell the firearm to a resident of another state, it's going to have to go through a federal firearms license. All right, if you want to loan a firearm, however, loans are controlled by federal law found at 18 U.S.C. 922A5. Now, 18 U.S.C. 922 is our prohibited acts federally when it comes to firearms. It's where most of the prohibited acts lie. For example, 922G establishes persons that are prohibited from possessing firearms. And 18 U.S.C. 922A5 says that generally it is illegal to loan or rent a firearm to a resident of another state. However, there is an exception there. You can loan or rent a firearm to a resident of another state for a temporary sporting purpose. So if it is a temporary sporting purpose, the gun could cross state lines. A Virginia resident, for example, could loan a firearm to a Pennsylvania resident to go shoot sporting clays or to go hunting with or to go target shooting, because that's a lawful sporting purpose that loan would be, in a temporary lawful sporting purpose. So if you loan a gun to a resident of another state and for some reason the feds decide to focus on them, they get caught with the firearm, and the federal government is looking at them and how they came into possession of that, and the federal government believes it's not in compliance with 922A5. How would the feds prove it? Well, number one, people start opening their mouths and they say, yes, I was loaned this gun for self-defense, for example, because obviously not a temporary sporting purpose. Alternatively, if you all are texting back and forth about it, hey, there's an escaped murderer on the loose, can you loan me a firearm to defend my house and my loved ones? So, generally speaking, illegal to loan firearms across state lines. There is that narrow exception, and the burden would be on the federal government to prove that it doesn't fall within that narrow exception. So, if you loan a firearm, don't talk about your purpose in text messages, and if the feds get involved for some reason, certainly, as you all should know, don't make statements without getting a lawyer and advice from a lawyer. Now, that covers loans, that covers the rental of firearms for a temporary sporting purpose. How else can firearms cross state lines? Well, we're going to talk about sales again in just a moment, but other ways they could cross state lines: if somebody passes away. If somebody dies and they leave their firearms to a resident of another state, or operation of law says that they go to a resident of another state, meaning that they died intestate, they died without a will, but the law of the state where they die says their children get all their things and their children live in Florida, for example, then that is another exception under federal law on how the firearms can transfer between residents of different states without going through an FFL. Finally, let's talk about selling firearms. You want to sell a firearm to another state. And the first thing, and this should be a given, but obviously you can't loan, you can't rent, you can't leave firearms, and you can't sell firearms to somebody who you know to be prohibited. you know that they're not allowed to possess it. So for purposes of our entire discussion today, you have to believe that the person that firearms are going to is eligible to possess. Let's say you want to sell firearms. There's going to be a difference if you're selling a long gun versus selling a handgun. If you're selling a long gun, the sale can occur at an FFL, federal firearms licensee, in either state, either your home state or the state of residence of the purchaser. A gun store in either state could make that transfer happen. If it is a handgun, it is going to have to be transferred through an FFL in the purchaser's home state. So I'm a Virginia resident. If I want to sell a handgun to a Pennsylvania resident, we need to get the handgun to a Pennsylvania FFL to complete the transfer. I could do that by either physically driving it up to Pennsylvania, or I could take it to an FFL here in Virginia and have it shipped to the FFL in Pennsylvania. Alternatively, I could ship it to the FFL in Pennsylvania, although there is some complication because a lot of common carriers refuse to accept handguns to ship from a non-licensee. And if I don't have an FFL, it's going to be difficult for me to find a common carrier that's willing to accept it. I hope this answers some questions for you about transferring firearms across state lines. For your loved ones that don't have firearms, those people that call you up and want to borrow a firearm when there's something going wrong in the world, call them right now and tell them go buy their own firearm and offer to get them trained, because the more people that are armed and know how to use the firearm, the better and safer this country will be. Until next time.